Hi everybody, today we are going to learn how to solve multi-step equations. All right, first we are going to talk about a new concept called the distributive property. So in real life, distribute means to pass out or to hand out, like you're distributing flyers. So we're essentially going to do the same thing with numbers and multiplications. We're going to give out multiplication. So when you see something like this with a number touching parentheses and then multiple terms inside, we're going to be using the distributive property. I do want to remind you that whenever you see a number touching parentheses like this, it means to multiply. So the distributive property is essentially multiplying this number to both terms on the inside of your parentheses. And we're going to show that with little rainbows. So this is going to remind us to multiply to both terms. So I'm going to multiply 5 to x, and then I'm going to multiply 5 to 2. So 5 times x is just 5x. 5 times 2 is 10. So 5 times x plus 2 becomes 5x plus 10. So you just have to make sure that this number on the outside gets multiplied to any term that's inside your parentheses. And remember, when we read this, we read the parentheses as times because it is multiplication. All right, let's try a couple more examples together. Here we're just going to distribute. So for part A, I see that I need to distribute -3 to x and -8. So I'm going to show that with my rainbows. And now all I need to do is multiply. -3 times x is -3x. -3 times -8 is +24. Watch out for whenever you're multiplying two negatives. They always will become a positive. All right, let's look at the second example. Here I see that I need to distribute 5 to 2x and to 11. So let's draw in our rainbows. I can read this as 5 times 2 times x. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 times x is 10x. And then I have to also remember to do 5 times 11, which is 55. All right, so now we know how to distribute. Go ahead and pause the video and give these two problems a try. All right, go ahead and check your work. Be careful here that you have -x and then -4 or plus -4 because we are multiplying a -1 to a +4. And then here, check, we should have -12x, and then here's the one to really watch out for, +4, because a negative times a negative always makes a positive. All right, so now we're going to try solving equations that involve the distributive property. So you really have two options, and it's really good to know both because sometimes one option will be much easier than the other. But regardless, the more options you have for solving an equation, the more successful you will be. So option one is whenever you see a number touching parentheses, you can start by distributing. So let's try that on the left. So we're going to distribute 3 to x and -2. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times -2 is -6. Now we just have a two-step equation. So here's my variable. I'm always going to start with the number that's alone. The inverse of subtraction is addition. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides. And I'm left with 3x, this becomes 0, equals 15. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3. And I have 1x, 3 divided by 3 is 1, so 1x equals 5. So we're done. So that's not too bad. But let's see what happens if we try option 2, which is to divide first. So here I have 3 times x minus 2. We're going to treat x minus 2 as a single term because it is grouped together. So since I have multiplication here, I can try doing the inverse of that, which is to divide both sides by 3. Now here, 3 divided by 3 becomes a 1, And we don't write the 1 when we're multiplying, so what we have left is x minus 2, and 9 divided by 3 is 3. So now you can see that we actually only have a two-step equation. We're going to use our inverse operation and add 2 to both sides. And what we have left is x equals 5. So you can see that we got the same answer, but this one only required 2 steps and this one required 3. So either you can distribute first and then solve, or you can just divide out the number from the beginning and then finish solving. I do want to do one more example together because sometimes one way works much better than the other. So you might come across problems where option 2 actually doesn't work that well. However, you might come across problems where option 2 is great. So it's good to see both cases. So for option 1, let's try distributing first again. So I'm going to distribute the 4 to the x and to the negative 1. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. And then I'm going to look at the side with my variable, and I'm going to start with the number that's alone. The inverse of negative 4 is plus 4. So I have 4 times x, this becomes 0, equals 9. Now I still need to remove the 4. Remember, when two things are touching, it's multiplication. The inverse is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 4. And what I have left is 1x equals, well, 4 doesn't go into 9, so I'm left with a fraction, 9 over 4. No big deal, and you can see that there is nothing too difficult about any of those steps. Now let's try doing option 2 again, where we divide this number instead of distributing. So let's divide both sides by 4. We have 4 divided by 4, which will turn into 1. So what I have left is x minus 1 equals 5 over 4. So you can see that right off the bat, I have a fraction, and I'm not even done solving, so this could be a problem. Now I'm going to add 1 to both sides to finish solving, but here's something that can be a little tricky for some people, adding fractions without common denominators. So now I'm going to actually have to rewrite this as 4 over 4, so it has a common denominator, and now I can add them up. X equals 9 over 4. So you can see that we still ended up with the same answer, but we had to deal with fractions, making it a little bit trickier. So the general rule is if this number does not divide in evenly to this number, probably option 2 is going to be a little bit trickier. So if you're ever unsure, I would always just distribute first and then finish solving. All right, so I have these 2 problems for you to try. Please pause the video and use whichever method you like, and we'll check the answer in just a few seconds. Okay, so on the left, you can see that I solved part A in 2 different ways. Either you could divide 7 on both sides to start and then subtract 3, which is a little bit quicker. Or you could do option A, which is to distribute. 7 times x is 7x. 7 times 3 is 21. Subtract 21 from both sides. Now be careful with this number. When I'm adding these 2 values, I notice I'm starting with more negative, so my answer will be negative. But I also notice that my signs are different, which means I need to subtract. I need to do 21 minus 14, which gives me 7. So this is negative 7. When I divide both sides by 7, be careful here as well. When you're multiplying or dividing with a single negative, your answer is negative. Now for part B, here I use the distributive property. Remember, a negative is just a negative 1. You just don't write the 1. Negative times x is negative x. Negative 1 times negative 2 becomes positive 2. So please check this number. And then you subtract 2 from both sides, but you have to make sure here you didn't leave your answer with a negative. This is just negative 1 times x. We need to move the negative 1 using the inverse operation, so our final answer is x equals negative 3. All right, now we're going to try ones that are a little bit more involved. We're going to try multi-step equations, so they're going to use all of the skills that we've been learning. So whenever you have something like this, we have a combination of distributive property with something else. So the first thing we are going to do is we're going to distribute here, because we cannot combine like terms here because this negative 1 is trapped. I can't move the negative 1 because it's trapped in my parentheses. So the only way we can really untrap it is to distribute the 3 to x and negative 1. So that's all I'm going to do in my first step. I do want to point out that you do not distribute the 3 to the 6 because the 6 is not inside the parentheses. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. The rest stays the same. Now we're going to use something that we talked about yesterday. When I have two terms that are on the same side, that are the same type of term, like negative 3 and 6, I'm going to combine them into a single term. So if I combine negative 3 and 6, I'm left with positive 3. So all I did here is I combined negative 3 and positive 6 to become positive 3. Now our equation is a little bit simpler and easier to work with. Now I'm going to start using my inverse operations. I see a plus 3, so I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. 3 times x equals 6. And then I see multiplication here, so I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. And I'm left with 1x equals 2. All right, we're going to try one more together. Here, this one is a little bit tricky because of the number we're distributing. So let's look at what we have. I see that we're going to do distributive property here. However, it's extremely important that you understand we are distributing negative 2. If the number touching the parentheses has a minus sign in front, we treat it as negative 2. Okay, so our first step, once again, is just going to be to distribute. That 5x is unaffected. So we have 9 equals 5x. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. So now I'm going to look and see if there's any terms on the same side that I can combine. And I notice that this 5x and this negative 2x can be combined. They're on the same side and they both have the same variable. So 5x minus 2x is just 3x. Now I'm going to use my inverse operation. Remember, I'm looking at these two numbers, this side with x. Always start with the number that's alone. The inverse of subtracting 6 is adding 6 to both sides of my equal sign. And I'm left with 15 equals 3 times x. The inverse of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3, and we're left with 5 equals x. All right, these are the last two. Go ahead and pause the video and give them both a try. Okay, let's check our work here. In part A, we start by distributing. 8 times x is 8x. 8 times 2 is 16. Then we combine 5 and 16 into 21. And then we use the inverse operation. This is a positive number, so the inverse is to subtract. And then we use the inverse operation again. For part B, we're going to distribute negative 1 to x and 5. Negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times 5 is negative 5. Then we're going to combine negative 1x and positive 3x into 2x. And from here, we're just going to use the inverse operations until we get our final answer, which is 2 equals x. All right, that is all for today's lesson. Thank you so much for watching.